The searchers froze at the overgrown drainage ditch where the winter light failed to reach, and the state trooper's gloved hand trembled slightly as the brushed debris revealed the unmistakable outline of a long-buried keepsake, its surface dulled but still carrying the weight of a vanished life that day alone. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. In the late autumn of 1986, Indianapolis carried the muted hum of a Midwestern city preparing for hard frost, the downtown court buildings casting long shadows across Washington Street, while suburban neighborhoods tucked their windows against early darkness. When 21-year-old Butler University student Carissa Monroe failed to return from her part-time library shift, the absence at first blended into the static of a city accustomed to college calendars, exam weeks, and winter break departures. Her roommate reported her missing only after a quiet Sunday morning stretched into a tense evening, the unmade bed and untouched textbooks indicating a break in routine sharper than any late-night study session. Carissa, known for predictable patterns and meticulous note-taking, had spoken of meeting an academic advisor about internship paperwork, a detail later confirmed in registrar records and campus emails preserved on aging dot matrix printouts. Her yearbook, a volume printed just months earlier, marked her as deliberate, engaged, and rooted in Midwestern modesty, its inked signatures ranging from brief holiday wishes to long paragraphs praising her discipline. Yet one inscription drew the eye of investigators later, a sharply angled pen stroke on the back page reading only, in letters faded but distinct, "Some truths wait." In the initial weeks, search teams combed wooded median strips near I-65, drainage canals behind the old rail yard, and the abandoned athletic lots where winter left stiff grass beneath scattered bleachers. Flyers printed by the Indianapolis Star were distributed across Broad Ripple and Meridian Kessler, the grayscale portrait showing Carissa's unassuming smile paired with a student ID photo that felt suddenly too official, as if already belonging to a file instead of a life. No significant leads surfaced, though two witnesses recalled seeing her near the campus fountain at dusk, carrying a canvas tote and pausing to adjust her scarf in the biting wind. Their descriptions aligned but lacked temporal precision, leaving detectives to build timelines around weather reports, streetlight activations, and bus schedules preserved in transportation department archives. Without surveillance systems common in later decades, movement relied on memory and stamped hall passes. In January 1987, 3 weeks after her disappearance, a snow plow operator clearing access roads near an industrial drainage corridor noticed an object partially dislodged by runoff. The item, later shown to be Carissa's key ring with a cracked Butler emblem, was found close to a rust-corroded sewer grate where silt collected in thick layers. The proximity to a stormwater junction suggested movement by seasonal flooding rather than intentional concealment, a theory supported by the absence of additional personal effects. The key ring alone could not indicate what happened, yet it confirmed that Carissa had reached or been brought to a peripheral zone beyond campus boundaries. This discovery compelled the Indianapolis Police Department to widen their grid to include the defunct rail spur leading north toward the White River banks, a region of sparse patrols and limited lighting. Public concern grew as winter turned to the thaw of March, the search narrative becoming a steady column in local news rather than a headline crisis. Journalists interviewed campus officials, archivists, and former classmates, constructing a portrait of a diligent student positioned on the threshold of adult independence. In April, a retired faculty assistant delivered a box of year-end materials to detectives, including the previous summer's yearbook where marginal notes and faded signatures were reviewed for potential messages. The cryptic final inscription, "Some truths wait," appeared unconnected until forensic handwriting comparison matched the angular script to a tutor listed in university payroll records. A graduate assistant named Milton Graff, age 26, who had relocated to Ohio months before Carissa vanished. Graff, interviewed by phone in 1987, denied any prolonged contact, citing standard tutoring appointments logged in academic files. No warrant was issued, and the case entered a long dormancy punctuated only by occasional archival reviews. Evidence remained sealed under climate control. The key ring, notebook pages, the yearbook, and soil samples from the drainage ditch. For over 2 decades, shifts in forensic methodology, including trace pollen analysis and advanced DNA refinement, transformed old evidence into revisitable material. In 2012, the Marion County Cold Case Unit reopened the file, prompted by digitization grants aimed at processing unresolved disappearances from the 1980s. The key breakthrough emerged from the yearbook itself. Under ultraviolet examination, impressions beneath the ink revealed prior erased writing, a full sentence once etched before being intentionally removed. Specialists reconstructed enough lexical structure to determine that Graff had composed a confession-like statement referencing the drainage corridor later searched. While not explicit in criminal description, the phrasing aligned with investigative timelines and campus logbooks showing the last tutoring session occurring the evening before Carissa disappeared. DNA analysis conducted in 2014 on residual biological material from the key ring, though degraded, isolated partial profiles consistent with Carissa and an unidentified contributor. When cross-referenced with expanded state databases, a familial link pointed to Graff's younger brother, arrested in an unrelated property offense. This connection justified a warrant for Graff's personal items collected during his Ohio residency, including notebooks stored in plastic totes. Inside one, detectives found a first-edition copy of the Butler Yearbook with the erased inscription intact, an unaltered version predating the library's archived copy. The preserved message contained directional cues referencing water runoff, night frost, and the exact drainage section documented in early search logs. Pressed by accumulating forensic correlations and a grand jury subpoena, Graff finally provided a statement in 2016, acknowledging that Carissa had confronted him over falsified tutoring hours, an impropriety that threatened his graduate funding. He admitted driving her to the off-campus corridor under the pretext of retrieving academic forms. In his account, an argument escalated near the drainage embankment, leading her to attempt leaving on foot toward the service road. Graff claimed panic rather than premeditation, confessing to leaving the scene and failing to report her condition when she slipped on wet concrete. While the exact biomechanics of her fall remained unconfirmed due to decomposition and environmental wear, forensic pathologists found Carissa's likely cause of death consistent with blunt impact, without sustained assault indicators. Given Graff's corroborated positional notes and timeline, prosecutors charged him with involuntary manslaughter and evidence tampering. In 2018, after plea negotiations, Graff received a 12-year sentence, reduced to 8 with credit for cooperation and absence of prior criminal history. The courtroom atmosphere remained restrained, with few spectators beyond former classmates and Carissa's aging parents. The legal outcome provided closure without spectacle, a resolution shaped by archival persistence rather than dramatic confession. In Indianapolis, the drainage corridor has since been converted into a monitored stormwater site with updated barriers and signage. The yearbook, once a simple academic keepsake, rests in a temperature-controlled evidence archive, its pages no longer functioning as campus nostalgia, but as a silent record of incremental investigative progress. Carissa's name appears on a modest memorial plaque near the university library, one among other students lost across decades, the inscription brief and unembellished. In the years following sentencing, Graff completed mandated counseling and educational programs, and his parole conditions restrict travel near the city where the investigation began. The cold case process, though extended by bureaucratic backlogs and technological evolution, emphasized the quiet tenacity of archival labor. Each map overlay, yearbook margin, and drainage sample reflected a city's commitment to restore narrative ownership to a life interrupted. In academic departments, freshman orientation materials now include safety briefings referencing historic disappearance cases, not as cautionary spectacle, but as institutional memory urging accountability in student-advisor interactions. The Monroe family, having relocated to Indiana's rural outskirts, maintains understated commemorations marked by seasonal flowers at the library lawn rather than public statements. Their decision to avoid media cycles left the case defined by court transcripts and evidence inventories, instead of televised retrospectives. The original campus fountain where Carissa was last confidently seen remains operational, its winter drainage system improved to prevent accumulation. The cold air of December still echoes across the academic quad each year, carrying trace reminders of the investigation that spanned decades and demanded attentiveness over urgency. Though procedural in tone, the resolution stands as an affirmation that even faint inscriptions on paper, nearly erased, can eventually connect hidden moments along service roads, stormwater nets, and the institutional corridors of Indianapolis, guiding, patiently, toward a lawful end. By 2020, the case file's final notation confirmed completion, leaving only the steady hum of campus life to eclipse what once lingered unsolved. Quiet memorial benches installed near the law school provide a subdued marker, not of spectacle, but of the enduring discipline of evidence, reminding each passing student that even the faintest archival trace can, with time, form the final thread of truth in a city that now walks forward with measured calm. All that remains is the turning of semesters, the rustle of pages, and the quiet certainty that the record endured. Within those lines, closure arrived without acclaim but with unwavering procedural truth. Thus Indianapolis archived its silence properly. Justice, quiet and complete, settled. Time and record now align. Truth remains here. The resolution of the case, though legally concluded, continued to ripple through Indianapolis institutions in ways that were slow, bureaucratic, and quietly definitive. After Graff's sentencing, the Marion County Cold Case Unit submitted its comprehensive after-action report, outlining the chronology from Carissa Monroe's initial disappearance in December 1986 through the eventual forensic breakthroughs that unfolded between 2012 and 2016. The purpose of this report, as noted on its final page, was not to dramatize the case, but to preserve investigative continuity for academic, judicial, and municipal training use. It detailed how advances in preservation chemistry enabled the recovery of erased graphite layers within the yearbook substrate, and how stormwater mapping advancements allowed for retrospective reconstruction of Carissa's likely path on the night she vanished. The drainage embankment, once merely a neglected component of city infrastructure, had become a nexus point for forensic theory, municipal planning, and the somber acknowledgement that neglected spaces often mirror institutional oversight. In the months following the verdict, Butler University initiated a campus audit of faculty and graduate assistant protocols. Graff's falsified hours and unreported meetings had not been alarming in 1986, when oversight systems relied on handwritten time cards and manual file archiving. The university's internal review, completed in 2019, recommended mandatory multi-person verification for any academic meeting conducted off-campus, especially when involving graduate assistants with funding tied to performance evaluations. No sensational announcements followed, and no commemorative press conference was held. Instead, a 2-page administrative memo, printed on plain letterhead, circulated via internal email. Its tone was procedural, referencing duty of care expectations, and the Monroe case as precedent without emotional flourish. It represented a corrective mechanism, one that acknowledged the incremental failures that had allowed Carissa's disappearance to go unexplained for decades. Decades of dormancy had shaped the narrative of the case as one of slow attrition, where each file transfer, evidence reboxing, and chain of custody update was less a dramatic turning point and more a quiet accumulation of relevance. Investigators who had been present at the early search grids in 1987 had long since retired by the time the cold case team reopened the file. Their handwritten notes, smudged in certain sections by weather and photocopy degradation, became critical again when re-examined with digital enhancement software. A particular margin entry nodding, engraving-like pen pressure on back page, later helped analysts justify closer ultraviolet inspection of the erased inscription in the yearbook. The phrase, "some truths wait," originally considered poetic, transformed into evidentiary index once contextual data aligned with time stamps and graphs' later admission. The Indianapolis Star, which had intermittently revisited the disappearance during anniversaries and retrospective features on unresolved cases, published a subdued article after sentencing. It appeared not on the front page, but in a middle section dedicated to city legal proceedings. The headline read simply, "Cold case closure reached in 1986 Monroe disappearance." Below it, in a brief paragraph, lay the factual core: identification of defendant, legal charge, sentencing term, and a final note indicating the Monroe family's request for privacy. The article concluded without editorial framing or sociological analysis, reflecting editorial restraint in a media climate that could easily have renewed public fascination with decades-old mystery. Instead, it allowed the case to exit public discussion through deliberate understatement. Throughout 2021 and 2022, data analysts within the Cold Case Division continued to reference Monroe's file in presentations on archival integrity. A particular slide in their internal training module displayed side-by-side images, the original faded inscription and the ultraviolet revealed erased text. The slide title read, "Persistence of Substrate Memory," a term highlighting how even cellulose fibers within a printed book could retain mechanical impressions long after ink had been removed. For new investigators, this functioned not as dramatic revelation, but as a reminder that investigative patience extended beyond human recollection into the molecular endurance of physical objects. The key ring, once found half submerged in winter runoff, appeared in a subsequent slide as an example of trace DNA recovery made possible by late 2000's improvements in low copy number amplification. What had been dismissed as environmentally compromised evidence in 1987 became, 25 years later, the hinge point in a forensic triangulation confirming graph's connection. The Monroe family's involvement with the case concluded without public gesture. Court transcripts recorded their attendance at sentencing, noting only their presence and the absence of victim impact statement requests. Their decision to abstain from speaking to the court aligned with their broader approach to the case: quiet, consistent observance without engagement with media cycles or advocacy groups. In rural Marion County, their home remained unmarked by any visible memorial, yet tax records indicated annual donations to the state victim notification system. This system, designed to ensure families receive procedural updates without participating in legal proceedings, served their needs precisely: administrative clarity without emotional revival. The city infrastructure changes that followed also reflected this restrained approach. The drainage corridor where Carissa's belongings were recovered received reinforced grading and scheduled maintenance checks tied to seasonal freeze-thaw patterns. Instead of plaques or historical markers, the site simply appeared in municipal safety improvement logs. Engineers who retrofitted the stormwater system likely knew only the technical details: erosion control, runoff mapping, access restrictions. Their design revisions improved flood resistance and pedestrian safety, without any accompanying narrative that the system they upgraded had once been the endpoint of a decades-long search. Practical urban upkeep replaced symbolic commemoration. In 2023, the cold case file was officially archived as concluded. The classification code shifted from open active to LG final, a designation indicating lawful resolution. Within the temperature-controlled records vault, the yearbook now rests in a sealed polymer sleeve, accompanied by a metadata sheet nodding its evidentiary role. The chain of custody ledger, which traveled across 37 years of transfers, exhibits the steady imprint of institutional handwriting styles evolving over time. Earlier signatures from 1987 bear cursive formality, while those from 2016 display compact lettering shaped by digital record reliance. Yet despite these stylistic shifts, the ledger's linear continuity remained unbroken, symbolizing the forensic discipline that defines cases resolved not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through incremental procedure. Outside the sealed vault, campus life continued without visible trace of the case's former urgency. Students circulated through winter semesters unaware that their routine paths crossed historical search grids, once mapped by officers armed only with flashlights and graphite pencils. The library lawn, where missing person flyers once rustled against campus bulletin boards in the late 1980s wind, now carried only seasonal student posters advertising research symposia and exam hour coffee distributions. The fountain near which Carissa was last confidently seen continues to operate through freeze cycles, its water pressure moderated by automatic shutoff valves installed during infrastructure modernization. Its presence remains unchanged, a fixture of campus continuity rather than an intentional memorial. The legal proceedings against Graff concluded formally in December 2024, when his parole board reviewed his compliance record. Documentation showed steady adherence to restrictions, required counseling completion, and absence of further violations. He expressed no request for early termination of conditions and no petition for relocation. His life, once entangled in academic ambition, now existed within quiet statutory boundaries, defined by check-ins and travel logs rather than peer-reviewed publications or university affiliations. In the procedural quiet that followed, Indianapolis returned fully to its ordinary cadence. The courthouse steps absorbed years of winter salt, and the city's legal system moved on to contemporary cases requiring immediate attention. Yet within the archive, beneath controlled humidity and numbered shelving, Carissa Monroe's file remains intact, a record of faint signatures, stormwater coordinates, substrate memory, and the deliberate rigor required to resolve disappearance into documented fact. Here, the narrative finds its final position, neither sensationalized nor erased, but methodically preserved, resting exactly where procedure dictates, beyond public gaze but never absent from institutional memory. The completion of the case, though long delayed, settled into Indianapolis history with almost imperceptible gravity, recorded not in commemorative displays or televised retrospectives, but in bureaucratic continuity, policy amendments, and the quiet adjustment of institutional expectations. When the archival authority issued its final certification of closure in early 2025, the case file was shifted into a controlled access section reserved for resolved historical investigations. Its placement did not alter public behavior nor generate retrospective storytelling beyond a brief mention in the county legal digest. Yet the act itself, administrative and discreet, represented the final procedural confirmation that the Monroe disappearance was no longer suspended between inquiry and uncertainty. It had returned, fully, to record. Examination of campus records conducted after closure revealed that the university had preserved, with unusual precision, the scheduling entries for the tutoring session that preceded Carissa's disappearance. These entries, once treated as routine clerical notations, became evidentiary anchors in hindsight. The line item reading Graph Monroe Reading Methods Review, written in blue ink at 5:17 p.m., confirmed her final documented interaction in an environment governed by academic formality rather than social unpredictability. The registrar who wrote the notation had long since retired, her handwriting nevertheless functioning as the ink-bound timestamp that anchored the eventual conviction. In training seminars for new academic record officers, photocopies of the scheduling page were shown not for emotional impact, but as illustration of the administrative responsibility inherent in maintaining accurate logs. The scribbled time, once unremarkable, had shaped the evidentiary trajectory of a decades-long inquiry. Outside the institutional framework, Indianapolis continued its seasonal rotation with little outward reference to the case, though its procedural influence surfaced in scattered municipal updates. In the Stormwater Division's improvement report for 2026, the drainage embankment once linked to the search efforts was listed among completed risk mitigation sites, accompanied by technical notes on reinforced culvert barriers, sediment filtration adjustments, and walkway restrictions. No mention of the Monroe case appeared in the document. Instead, the justification cited regional flood cycle predictions and the need for controlled runoff dispersion. Yet for those familiar with the forensic archive, the line item stood as collateral consequence, an infrastructural refinement indirectly derived from investigative necessity. In the same period, the state forensic training curriculum incorporated a module titled Erasure Recovery and Paper Substrate Persistence, referencing the Monroe Yearbook inscription without directly invoking personal narrative. The training materials depicted a series of magnified ultraviolet scans demonstrating how pressure discrepancies remain within printing paper fibers decades after graphite removal. These scans, dispassionate and technical, now functioned as teaching tools rather than evidentiary exhibits. The inscription that once acted as a cryptic marker of withheld truth had been transformed into a methodological case study on forensic patience, its words transferred from emotional suggestion to procedural exemplar. Families affected by similar long-dormant investigations occasionally requested access to the Monroe Report for guidance on navigating slow legal systems. Though heavily redacted in certain sections to protect personal details, the report's timeline served as a model for realistic expectation. It documented how the absence of immediate resolution does not equate to investigative abandonment, but rather to archival stewardship, the maintenance of potential until technology, jurisdictional alignment, and evidentiary threshold converge. This shift in understanding reflected a broader cultural maturation in the handling of unsolved cases. Closure, it implied, is sometimes a matter not of urgency, but of administrative endurance and the eventual coherence of disparate fragments. In the years following Graff's parole eligibility, no petitions for revision or contestation emerged. His record remained stable, his post-release obligations unchallenged. His name appeared in annual supervision rosters for a period and gradually disappeared once statutory duration elapsed. He relocated to a residential zone meeting parole guidelines, without public identification or continued academic involvement. The legal framework surrounding his status ensured minimal visibility, aligning with the court's original tone of restrained finality. There were no published interviews, retrospective accounts, or memoirs seeking to reinterpret events. Silence served as extension of adjudication rather than avoidance of reflection. The Monroe family, retaining their preference for privacy, continued to maintain quiet seasonal acknowledgments. Parish donation records indicated contributions made in Carissa's name to a scholarship fund supporting students in library sciences, not labeled in direct memorial terms, but structured to provide institutional support in the field she once worked in. The fund's brochure did not include her photograph, case history, or identifying narrative. It simply listed eligibility requirements, application timelines, and rotating donor initials. Among them, a recurring M and C. This anonymity, matched with indirect impact, provided resolution without spectacle. On campus, the fountain where Carissa had last been reliably placed persisted in its original spatial configuration, now bordered by improved winter maintenance protocols. Students continued to pass the site daily, unaware that the space once functioned as the last clear coordinate in a case that would span nearly 4 decades before reaching procedural end. The absence of a memorial plaque there reflected a deliberate decision, not to erase, but to allow academic space to resume its neutral function, unburdened by interpretive overlay. The binder containing the investigative sequence, from photocopied flyers to ultraviolet yearbook scans, remains shelved 12 aisles back from the main archive entrance, protected by environmental regulation and access protocols requiring judicial clearance. Its spine, labeled with a numeric code rather than a name, blends seamlessly among hundreds of resolved volumes. If removed for study, its contents would appear methodical, composed of evidentiary grids, stormwater maps, lab reports, chain of custody receipts, and final sentencing documents. The emotional arc that defined public disappearance narratives is absent from its pages, replaced by the static weight of corroboration and the quiet assertion of completed process. In this way, the Monroe case reaches its final archival position, not erased, not elevated, simply present within the legal continuity of Indianapolis as a testament to procedural patience, record integrity, and the unembellished endurance of investigative systems operating across generations. Time did not sensationalize it, nor did resolution amplify it. Instead, the case settled into the city's enduring ledger, a line completed, an inquiry resolved, and a life documented to the greatest factual extent the record could sustain. Beyond the courthouse walls, the city continued through winters defined by salt-streaked roads, library stacks reorganized by semester demand, and drainage channels cleared according to maintenance cycle. Nothing in the local atmosphere signified the case any longer, which, in its way, marked the completion more definitively than any commemorative marker could. Procedure had fulfilled its mandate. Record had met truth. The archive held the rest, silent, unabridged, and secure. Thus the narrative concludes in alignment with its task, lawful resolution, evidentiary coherence, and sustained quiet after a very long wait.